At 38 years old, Avery Wesleyan managed the family hardware store in New Haven, a legacy of sweat and sawdust passed down from his grandfather. He earned a salary of $58,342 a year. It was a good life, an honest one, built on the solid foundation of helping people find the right bolt or the perfect shade of semi-gloss paint. He drove a 10-year-old Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on it and wore an $89 Timex watch. His life was measured and modest, which is why the document in his hands felt like a dispatch from a parallel universe, a universe where numbers had no meaning and cruelty was a currency. It had arrived at 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, delivered by a bored-looking process server who had interrupted him while he was explaining the merits of a DeWalt power drill over a cheaper Ryobi to a young couple. The manila envelope felt unnervingly light. Now sitting in his small, cluttered office, the air thick with the scent of wood glue and metal filings, Avery stared at the divorce petition. His wife, Jayla, was divorcing him. That part was not a shock. The last 2 years had been a slow, agonizing drift into separate lives, her orbit pulling towards something shinier and more expensive than he could ever offer. Or so she thought. The shock was on page 4, section 8, under the heading Alimony and Asset Distribution. Jayla was demanding a lump sum payment of $4 million. $4 million. The number was so absurd, so disconnected from the reality of his life as the manager of a local hardware store that he almost laughed. He imagined his bank account, which currently held $3,451. He thought of his annual salary. To pay her $4 million, he would have to work for 68 years without spending a single cent on food or rent. The absurdity curdled into a cold, heavy dread in the pit of his stomach. His phone buzzed on the desk, rattling against a stray washer. It was her. He stared at her name on the screen, the photo of her smiling on a beach in a $200 bikini he'd paid for, and a wave of nausea washed over him. He let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the notification for a new message popped up. He pressed play, his thumb trembling slightly. Her voice, usually a smooth, carefully modulated alto, was sharp with a kind of gleeful malice. "Avery, darling, did you get my little surprise? I just wanted to make sure the papers found you. I imagine you're a little overwhelmed right now. $4 million is a lot of money, I know, but my lawyer, a fantastic guy, bills at $900 an hour, by the way, says I'm entitled to it to maintain my lifestyle. So I guess my only question is, how are you going to pay for your own lawyer? Hire one with what money exactly? Good luck with that. Talk soon." The message ended. The office was silent again, save for the hum of the old refrigerator in the break room. Avery leaned forward, resting his head in his hands. The cheap, recycled paper of the petition felt rough beneath his fingers. He had dedicated 10 years of his life to this woman, to building a home, to loving her. And in the end, it all came down to this: a bill for services rendered, a demand he could never meet, a laugh at his expense. He had no idea how wrong she was. Their life together hadn't always been a ledger of costs and benefits, or at least Avery hadn't seen it that way. He remembered the early days, the walks through East Rock Park, the shared laughter over cheap pizza from Modern Pizza on State Street. He was a simple man from a family that valued work ethic and community above all else. His father and grandfather had built Wesleyan hardware from a single storefront into a beloved local institution across 3 counties. They taught him the dignity of a hard day's work, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. They also, quietly and without fanfare, built a formidable fortune, a fact they shielded from the world with a fierce dedication to modesty. Avery inherited their values and their secret. Jayla had entered his life like a whirlwind of glamour and ambition. A marketing executive with a Yale MBA, she was beautiful, intelligent, and seemed for a time to be charmed by his grounded nature. She called it authentic. Their life was a study in contrasts that initially felt complementary. He loved the solid, sprawling Westville colonial that had been in his family for 3 generations. She saw it as a placeholder until they could afford a glass-walled monstrosity in Greenwich. He found joy in the Saturday morning rush at the store. She found it embarrassing that her husband wore a work apron. The facade of their domestic normalcy was built on a foundation of his quiet concessions and her escalating demands, each one tagged with a specific dollar amount. One evening, about a year before the divorce papers, they were getting ready to attend a charity gala for the hospital. Avery was adjusting the knot on his one good tuxedo, a classic black number that had cost him $600 10 years prior. Jayla emerged from their bedroom, a vision in a shimmering deep blue Burberry gown that he knew, because he'd seen the credit card bill, had cost $2,400. "How do I look?" she asked, turning so the fabric caught the light. "You look beautiful, Jayla, as always," he said, and he meant it. She frowned at her reflection, then at him. "This old thing? I feel like I've been photographed in it a dozen times. And that tuxedo, Avery, it's so dated. Don't you think it's time we updated our image? Robert and his wife just bought a place in Darien, a $3 million place. And he's just a vice president. We live in a 5-bedroom colonial in Westville, Jayla. We have a good life," Avery said softly. The house was, in fact, owned outright by the Wesleyan Family LLC, a detail he had never burdened her with. She assumed they were simply paying a modest, family-rate rent to his extended relations. "We have a stagnant life," she corrected, dabbing a $500 jar of La Mer cream on her cheeks. "You're content to just stay here, in this town, in that dusty old store. Don't you want more?" He did want more. He wanted a partner who saw the value in what he did. He wanted a family. He wanted the easy, companionable silence his parents had shared, a love built on shared history and mutual respect, not on a constant, upwardly mobile climb. Another time he came home from a particularly grueling day of inventory, his hands stained with grease from fixing a broken freight elevator. He found her in the kitchen, surrounded by shopping bags from the shops at Yale. A pair of $700 Jimmy Choo heels sat on the kitchen island next to a loaf of bread. "Rough day?" she asked, barely looking up from her phone, where she was scrolling through pictures of Italian villas. "Just inventory," he said, washing his hands at the sink. "What's all this?" "Oh, just a few things. Retail therapy," she said with a dismissive wave. "I was feeling a little down, thinking about our finances. My goodness, that new BMW 3 Series is calling my name. The lease is only $900 a month, but I suppose that's out of the question, isn't it? On your salary." Your salary was always delivered with a subtle, cutting emphasis. It was a constant reminder of his perceived inadequacy. He would just nod, a tight knot forming in his chest. He never told her that his salary was a deliberately structured, modest stipend drawn from the business. He never told her about the $22 million irrevocable trust set up by his grandfather, a fortress of financial security managed by a board of trustees that included his stern but loving Auntie Carol. The trust was designed to protect the family's legacy from exactly this kind of situation, from gold diggers, from frivolous lawsuits, from people who saw a last name and saw a dollar sign. Jayla had married Avery Wesleyan, the hardware store manager. She had no idea she had also married into Wesleyan Holdings, LLC. And his family, with generations of quiet wealth behind them, had seen her coming from a mile away. They had hoped he was wrong about her. He had hoped they were. Now, the proof was on cheap paper in a manila envelope. The 6 months between the serving of the papers and the first preliminary hearing were a masterclass in cruelty. Jayla, convinced of her impending windfall, adopted the persona of a woman already divorced and fabulously wealthy. She moved out of the Colonial and into a sleek, obscenely expensive 2-bedroom condo in East Rock, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a concierge. The rent was $4,000 a month, paid for with a new credit card she'd opened, clearly anticipating a swift and massive settlement. Her mockery was relentless and came in a variety of forms. There were the phone calls, filled with faux concern that dripped with condescension. "Avery, I was just talking to my lawyer, Robert. He's just so brilliant. And he said we need to get this moving. Have you managed to find representation yet? I know it's a stretch for you, but there are some legal aid societies. I could have my assistant send you a list." Then there were the text messages, often arriving late at night. One Saturday, Avery was at home, oiling the hinges on a creaky antique cabinet his mother had loved. His phone buzzed. It was a picture from Jayla. She was at a high-end restaurant in Greenwich, holding up a glass of wine. The bottle, a 2010 Chateau Margaux, was visible in the background. Avery knew it cost over $1,500. The text read, "To new beginnings. You should try this place sometime." Oh wait, never mind. The public humiliations were the worst. About 2 months in, they had to meet at a sterile office building in downtown New Haven for a mandatory mediation session. Jayla arrived in a sharp, cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than Avery's rent payment for his small, temporary apartment. Her lawyer, a slick, overconfident man named Robert Vance, whose suit cost at least $5,000, treated Avery like a bug he was about to squash. Avery, following the explicit instructions of his own counsel, had come alone. He wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks. He looked and felt like the part he was playing, a man completely out of his depth. "Mr. Wesleyan," Vance began, leaning back in his chair, "my client has been more than generous in her initial petition. $4 million is, frankly, a conservative estimate of what she is owed for the years she dedicated to this marriage, sacrificing her own high-powered career." Avery remained silent. "We are prepared to be reasonable, however," Vance continued, steepling his fingers. "If you agree today to liquidate your assets, the store, the house, and sign over 70% of the proceeds, plus ongoing alimony of $20,000 a month, we can avoid a lengthy and, for you, a very embarrassing court battle." Jayla, sitting beside her lawyer, smirked. "Be realistic, Avery. You can't afford a court battle. You can't even afford a decent lawyer. Don't make this harder on yourself." The mediator, a tired-looking woman who had clearly seen it all, looked at Avery. "Mr. Wesleyan, do you have a response?" Avery took a slow breath. He looked at Jayla, at the cold, calculating woman she had become. Or perhaps always was. "I'll need some time to consider my options," he said, his voice quiet and even. Jayla actually laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Consider your options? Avery, you have no options. You have a hardware store and a used car. My options include a summer in the Hamptons. Just sign the papers." He stood up. "I need to get back to the store," he said. "We got a shipment of snow shovels in, and we're expecting a blizzard." As he walked out, he heard Vance say to Jayla, "Don't worry, he'll crack. They always do." Each barb, each dismissive laugh, each ostentatious display of her presumed future wealth was a piece of fuel. Avery absorbed it all, his face a mask of weary resignation. Inside, however, a cold, hard resolve was forging itself in the fire of her contempt. He was following a strategy, a meticulous plan laid out for him in a place Jayla could never imagine. While she was posting her temporary triumphs on Instagram, Avery was engaged in a very different kind of activity. He was playing dumb, and he was getting very, very good at it. While Jayla was broadcasting her life of anticipated luxury, Avery retreated into a carefully constructed facade of poverty and helplessness. It was a grueling performance, one that grated against his honest nature, but his legal team had been adamant. "Let her believe she has you on the ropes," his lead counsel, Elias Sterling, had instructed. "Let her get cocky. Let her build her entire case on the assumption that you are who she thinks you are. Every arrogant post, every condescending text is another nail in her coffin." So, Avery played his part. Each lie he told her was a small, painful scene in a play only he and his silent partners knew was being staged. The first lie came a week after the mediation. Jayla called, her voice impatient. "Avery, I haven't heard from you. Did you come to your senses? My lawyer is about to file a motion to compel, and trust me, you don't want that." Avery was in his small, rented apartment on a quiet street in Westville, a far cry from the Grand Colonial. He had a bowl of $6 ramen in front of him. On the table next to it was a detailed financial report from his forensic accountant outlining how Jayla had systematically drained their joint checking account in the 3 months prior to filing for divorce. "I'm looking into legal aid," Avery said, his voice deliberately tired. "I made some calls today. The wait list is pretty long." He could almost hear her roll her eyes through the phone. "Legal aid? Avery, how pathetic. You're going to fight my $900 an hour lawyer with a free attorney who's juggling 100 cases? This is just sad." "It's the best I can do right now, Jayla," he said. "Things are tight." That, at least, was true. His personal account was, by design, kept lean. The second lie was a face-to-face encounter. She had demanded he meet her at the Colonial to hand over some mail that had been mistakenly delivered there. She arrived in her new white BMW 3 Series, a $43,000 symbol of her confidence. She found him in the yard, raking leaves. He was wearing an old, paint-stained sweatshirt. "You look terrible," she said, not as a greeting, but as a statement of fact. "Stressed. Are you eating?" "I'm managing," he said, leaning on the rake. "Listen," she said, getting to the point. "Robert, my lawyer, thinks you're stalling. He says we can get a default judgment if you don't respond to the petition soon. That means I get everything I asked for. So what's it going to be?" Avery looked down at the pile of autumn leaves. "I might have to represent myself," he said, letting the words hang in the air. "I've been reading some books from the library about divorce law." The look on her face was a mixture of pity and contempt that was almost comical. "You're going to represent yourself? Against Robert Vance? Oh, Avery, this is more pathetic than I imagined. You're bringing a rake to a gunfight." She took the stack of mail from his hand, careful not to let her manicured fingers touch his. "Don't say I didn't warn you." As she drove away, he saw her laughing on the phone with someone. He went back to his raking, his movements steady and methodical. The most difficult lie was the one he had to tell his Auntie Carol. Not a real lie, but a lie of omission to the outside world. He met her for their monthly lunch at a small, unassuming diner in Hamden they had been frequenting for years. Auntie Carol was the executor of the family trust, a sharp, no-nonsense black woman in her late 60s, with a mind like a steel trap and a deep, abiding love for her family. Her hair was styled in elegant, silver-streaked locks, and she wore a simple but perfectly tailored dress. "How are you holding up, son?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "I'm all right, Auntie," he said. "It's difficult, hearing her talk." "I read the last report from Mr. Sterling's team," she said, sipping her tea. "The Instagram posts, the credit card statements. She's a fool, Avery. A greedy, short-sighted fool." "I know," he said quietly, "but it's hard not to react, not to just tell her the truth. And spoil Mr. Sterling's masterpiece?" Auntie Carol smiled, a rare and powerful thing. Patience. Your grandfather used to say, "Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake." She is not just making a mistake. She is building a bonfire of her own vanity. All we have to do is wait for the right moment to hand her the match. She reached across the table and patted his hand. Her skin was warm and soft. "You are doing the right thing. You are protecting your grandfather's legacy. You are protecting our family. Let her laugh. The best punchlines are the ones you don't see coming." He nodded, feeling the strength of her resolve flow into him. He finished his 89-cent coffee, paid the $12 bill for their lunch, and went back to his life of quiet deception, fortified by the knowledge that a silent, powerful army was standing at his back. While Avery was playing the part of a destitute hardware store manager, another story was unfolding in the hushed, climate-controlled offices of Sterling, Price, and Associates in Stamford. The glass tower where they were located was a world away from the sawdust and paint fumes of Wesleyan hardware. It was a place of emotional distance, where problems were reduced to data points and legal precedents. Avery's first meeting there was 2 weeks after he was served. He took the train from New Haven to Stamford, a 45-minute journey. He walked into a lobby of marble and brushed steel, and took the elevator to the 45th floor. The doors opened onto a serene reception area with a panoramic view of the Long Island Sound. He was met not by a receptionist, but by a man who introduced himself as Elias Sterling. Mr. Sterling was a tall, impeccably dressed black man in his late 50s. His suit was a deep charcoal gray, custom-tailored, and probably cost $10,000. His presence was so commanding, so utterly self-assured, that Avery felt an immediate sense of calm. "Mr. Wesleyan," Sterling said, his voice a low baritone, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Your aunt speaks very highly of you. Please, come in." He led Avery not to an office, but to a large conference room. Seated around a massive mahogany table were 11 other people. Men and women of varying ages, all dressed in similarly sharp business attire. They all stood as Avery entered. "Avery," Sterling began, "I'd like to introduce you to your team." He went around the table, a dizzying cascade of names and specialties. "This is Sarah Jones, our head of trust and estate law. She worked with your grandfather to draft the original trust documents. Michael Chen, our lead forensic accountant. He can find a hidden penny anywhere in the world. Rebecca Marks, real estate law. She manages all of the LLC's property holdings. David Kim, asset protection, and so on. There were specialists in family law, corporate litigation, tax law, and even an expert in digital forensics who was already compiling a complete archive of Jayla's social media presence. It was an army, a 12-person army of legal assassins, all on a retainer paid by the Wesleyan Family LLC. Their combined hourly billing rate was north of $10,000. "Please sit," Sterling said, gesturing to the chair at the head of the table. Spread before him were documents, binders, and a large screen showing a complex flowchart. "Here is the situation as we see it," Sterling said, his tone crisp and professional. "The petitioner, Ms. Jayla Wesleyan, has filed a petition for divorce, claiming a right to $4 million based on a gross misinterpretation of your financial standing. Our objective is not merely to defend against this claim, but to demonstrate its utter lack of merit so decisively that this court is never troubled by this matter again." Sarah Jones, a sharp woman with her hair in neat cornrows, spoke up. "The Wesleyan Family Trust, valued at approximately $22 million, is an irrevocable dynastic trust. You are a lifetime beneficiary, Avery, not an owner. The assets are controlled by a board of trustees, headed by your aunt. Your access to funds is strictly governed by the trust's charter. Your $58,000 salary is your only personal income. The trust is, for all legal intents and purposes, a separate entity. It is untouchable." Rebecca Marks, the real estate lawyer, added, "The Colonial in Westville is owned by the Wesleyan Family Holdings LLC. You are a tenant at will. She has no claim to it. We have already had the locks changed." Michael Chen, the forensic accountant, pushed a binder toward Avery. "This is our preliminary analysis of Ms. Wesleyan's finances. She entered the marriage with $78,000 in student loan and credit card debt. Over the past 5 years, her spending has exceeded the total marital income by an average of 32% annually. This deficit was covered by periodic, documented gifts from you, drawn from your personal accounts, and a dramatic increase in her own credit card debt, which now stands at over $120,000. The meeting went on for 3 hours. They discussed strategy, timelines, and contingencies. They were calm, methodical, and utterly confident. They were not planning a defense. They were planning a demolition. As the meeting concluded, Sterling walked Avery to the elevator. "I understand this is difficult on a personal level, Avery," he said, his professional demeanor softening for a moment. "To have your life and your marriage dissected like this. But your father was a wise man. He and your grandfather built this structure not just to protect wealth, but to protect the family from those who would seek to exploit it. All you have to do is hold the line. Act the part. We will handle the rest." Walking out of the glass tower and back into the real world, Avery felt a strange sense of detachment. His life was now split in two. There was the public life of the beleaguered, broke hardware store manager, and the secret life of a man with a $22 million trust and a legal team that could probably overthrow a small country. He just had to keep the two from ever touching until the time was right. There is a moment in every crisis when the fog of emotion burns away, leaving behind a cold, stark, and sensory clarity. For Avery, that moment did not happen in a lawyer's office or during a heated phone call. It happened on a quiet Thursday evening, 6 weeks after he was served, alone in the vast, silent space of the Westville Colonial. He had been given permission by the LLC, a formal, legalistic process that felt both absurd and necessary, to retrieve some personal effects. The house felt alien. The air was stale. Dust motes danced in the slanted evening light pouring through the bay windows. Jayla had taken most of the newer, more expensive furniture, leaving behind oddly shaped voids on the carpets and a collection of older, sturdier pieces that belonged to his family. His mother's mahogany dining table, his grandfather's favorite armchair. He had the divorce petition in his briefcase. He hadn't been able to bring himself to read it in its entirety since that first day. He'd only absorbed the headline number, $4 million. Now, in the quiet of this house that was both his and not his, he felt a compulsion to understand the architecture of her greed. He sat at the mahogany dining table, the wood cool beneath his forearms, and opened the folder. The legal language was dense, but the intent was clear. He skipped past the boilerplate and went straight to the exhibits and declarations. Jayla, with the help of her lawyer, had constructed a fantasy world. She had listed the hardware store, Wesleyan Hardware, as a personal asset of his, estimating its value at upwards of $5 million. She had listed the Westville Colonial as their marital home. With an appraised value of $1.2 million, she described Avery's future earning potential as limitless, suggesting that his role as a simple store manager was a temporary affectation. He ran his hand over the table, the surface smooth and glossy from a century of polish and family dinners. His mother used to spend hours polishing it with a special lemon-scented oil. He could still faintly smell it, a ghost of warmth and care in the cold, empty room. The contrast between that memory and the cold, transactional words on the page in front of him was a physical blow. He turned to the last page, her personal declaration. He began to read. "For 10 years," she wrote, I have supported my husband in his modest business pursuits, sacrificing my own lucrative career in marketing to be a homemaker and hostess. I have managed our household, entertained his family, and encouraged his endeavors, all with the understanding that we were building a future together. His decision to remain in a low-paying job was a source of constant strain, but I believed in his potential. I am owed compensation for the lost career opportunities and the emotional labor of maintaining a lifestyle far below what our combined potential should have afforded. Emotional labor? The phrase struck him as obscene. He thought of the nights he'd spent rubbing her feet after she'd complained about a long day of shopping. He thought of the family vacations he'd meticulously planned and paid for, only for her to complain about the hotel not being 5-star. He thought of the thousands of small, unspoken ways he had tried to build a bridge to her, a bridge she was now trying to burn for insurance money. The final, crushing discovery was in her budget proposal. It was a detailed list of her projected monthly expenses, the justification for the massive alimony claim. It included $4,000 for rent on her new condo, or $500 for a car lease, $2,000 for clothing and personal grooming, $200 for dining and entertainment, and $1,000 for vacation fund. It was a budget for a life of leisure, funded by the destruction of his. He closed his eyes. The sensory details of the room became sharp, acute. The feel of the cheap, slightly damp copy paper of the petition, the faint, ghostly scent of his mother's lemon polish, the sight of the empty space on the wall where a painting she'd hated, a landscape by a local artist his father admired, used to hang. The sound of his own breathing, steady and slow in the oppressive silence. In that moment, any lingering trace of love, of nostalgia, of grief for the woman he thought he had married, was cauterized. It was not a hot, angry fire, but a cold, clean one. He was not looking at the love of his life. He was looking at a hostile corporate takeover. She had assessed his assets, inflated their value, and was attempting a leveraged buyout of his future. The love had never been real. It was an investment she was now trying to cash out. He folded the papers, placed them neatly back in his briefcase, and stood up. The house was no longer a home filled with ghosts of what might have been. It was a piece of real estate, an asset to be protected. The fight was no longer personal. It was business. The morning of the first preliminary hearing was gray and overcast. A damp chill hung in the Stamford air, the kind that seeps into your bones. Tuesday, November 12th. Avery had been awake since 4 a.m., not from anxiety, but from a strange, profound calm. He had performed his morning ritual, a cup of black coffee, a review of the overnight sales report from the online store, a 10-minute meditation. At 7 a.m., he put on his chosen armor for the day. It was not a $10,000 custom suit, but a simple, well-fitting Navy suit from J. Crew that had cost $400. His statement was not to be made with his clothes, but with his silence. He arrived at the Stamford Superior Court building at 8:45 a.m. The building was a modern, soulless structure of concrete and glass. He walked through the metal detectors and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. He saw them immediately. Standing near the entrance to courtroom 3B, Jayla and her lawyer, Robert Vance. Jayla looked like a predator who had cornered her prey. She was wearing an $8,700 Armani power suit in a severe shade of charcoal. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, tight ponytail, and her face was set in a mask of grim triumph. Vance beside her was preening, checking his $20,000 Patek Philippe watch and rocking back and forth on the heels of his $1,000 Italian leather shoes. They saw Avery approach, alone, and exchanged a small, confident smile. "Avery," Jayla said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You came? I was worried you might not show. Did you find a lawyer, or are you really doing this yourself?" "Good morning, Jayla," Avery said, his voice even. He nodded at Vance. "Mr. Vance?" Vance gave him a dismissive once-over. Wesleyan, let's not waste the court's time. My final pre-hearing offer, 1 million lump sum plus the house. Take it or leave it. In 30 minutes, that offer is off the table and we go for the full 4 million. I'll take my chances with the judge, Avery said quietly. He walked past them and entered the courtroom, taking a seat at the respondent's table on the left. The room was standard-issue judicial, with cheap wood paneling and poor lighting. It smelled of old paper and stale air. At 9:02 a.m., the bailiff called out, "All rise." Judge Eleanor Morrison entered, a formidable woman in her 60s, with a reputation for being sharp, fair, and utterly intolerant of nonsense. She sat, adjusted her robes, and peered over her spectacles. "Be seated," she commanded. She shuffled some papers. "We are here for the matter of Wesleyan Vierce, Wesleyan, petition for dissolution of marriage. Let's have appearances." For the petitioner. Vance shot to his feet. Robert Vance, of Vance, Calloway, and Hurst. For the petitioner, Ms. Jayla Wesleyan, Your Honor. He gave a slight theatrical bow. Judge Morrison made a note. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. And for the respondent?" She looked at Avery, who was sitting alone. "Mr. Wesleyan, are you representing yourself pro se?" Avery stood up. His heart was beating a steady, slow rhythm. This was it, the moment the entire 6-month strategy had been building towards. "Avery Wesleyan for myself, Your Honor," he said, his voice clear and calm. "And my counsel." As if on cue, the courtroom doors swung open. Elias Sterling entered first. He was a vision of expensive, quiet competence. He walked with a silent, purposeful stride to the respondent's table. "Elias Sterling, lead counsel for Mr. Wesleyan, Your Honor." Before the judge could even react, a second person entered. Sarah Jones. "Sarah Jones, trust and estate counsel for Mr. Wesleyan, Your Honor." Then a third. Michael Chen. "Michael Chen, forensic accounting for Mr. Wesleyan." Then a fourth. "Rebecca Marks. Rebecca Marks, real estate counsel." One by one they filed in. A silent, perfectly coordinated procession of legal power. David Kim, asset protection. Dr. Helen Foster, expert on vocational rehabilitation. 6 more followed, specializing in tax, corporate structures, and family law. 12 lawyers in total. Men and women, a diverse group of top-tier professionals, all in dark, conservative suits. They didn't sit in the gallery. They filled the first 2 rows behind the respondent's table, a solid, unmoving wall of human expertise. The air in the room became thick and still. Avery watched Jayla. Her face was a cinematic progression of collapsing confidence. Her initial smirk faltered into confusion. The confusion morphed into disbelief as the 4th, 5th, and 6th lawyer entered. As the 10th, 11th, and 12th took their seats, her face went slack with a dawning, horrified comprehension. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her expensive makeup looking like a painted mask on a corpse. She looked at Avery, her eyes wide with a question she couldn't ask. "Who are you?" Her lawyer, Robert Vance, was frozen mid-pose, his mouth slightly agape. His tan seemed to have faded. He looked from the sea of lawyers to his single client and back again, the gears of his mind grinding as he tried to calculate what astronomical level of miscalculation he had just made. Judge Morrison, to her credit, recovered first. She took off her glasses and polished them slowly. She looked at the 12 lawyers, then at Mr. Sterling, then at the single piece of paper in her hand, which was Jayla's petition. A long, heavy silence filled the courtroom. Finally, she put her glasses back on and leaned into the microphone. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice dangerously soft, "this is an unusual showing for a preliminary hearing on temporary support. Perhaps you could enlighten the court as to why Mr. Wesleyan requires a legal team that appears to outnumber the available staff of this courthouse. Sterling rose. He did not smile. His face was a mask of polite professional gravity. With all due respect, Your Honor, we believe this showing is not only appropriate, but necessary. We are here today to ensure that this court's valuable time is never wasted on this matter again. The petitioner's claims are not just baseless. They are a work of fiction, so grandiose as to constitute a fraud upon the court. We are here to present the facts, cold, hard, and documented. After which, we are confident the court will see fit to dismiss these frivolous claims and consider sanctions against the petitioner and her counsel for filing them in the first place. Jayla made a small, choked sound. The strike had begun. The collapse was not a slow crumble. It was a swift, systematic demolition. Judge Morrison, her initial surprise replaced by a steely-eyed curiosity, gestured for Mr. Sterling to proceed. "Very well, counsel. You have my full attention. Let's hear these facts." What followed was not a legal argument, but a clinical 20-minute execution. Mr. Sterling orchestrated it like a symphony conductor, calling upon his specialists for brief, devastating solos. First, Sarah Jones, the trust expert. She stood and, in a calm, academic tone, explained the nature of the $22 million Wesleyan Family Trust. "Your Honor, the trust is an irrevocable, generation-skipping trust established in 1982. It is a separate legal entity, governed by an independent board. Mr. Wesleyan is a beneficiary, not a direct owner. He receives a fixed annual salary from his employment at a company owned by a separate LLC, which itself is an asset of the trust. His documented personal income is $58,342. The petitioner has no more claim to the trust's assets than she would to the assets of the Federal Reserve." She sat down. Next, Rebecca Marks, the real estate lawyer. "Your Honor, the petitioner claims a 50% stake in the marital home in Westville. However, that property is, and has been for 60 years, owned by Wesleyan Family Holdings, LLC. Mr. and Ms. Wesleyan were tenants at will, paying a nominal rent. We have submitted the deed and LLC documentation as Exhibit A." She sat down. Then came Michael Chen, the forensic accountant. He didn't even stand, simply directing the judge's attention to a binder that had been delivered to her bench. "Your Honor, Exhibit B contains a full accounting of the petitioner's finances. She entered the marriage with significant debt and has, for the past 5 years, maintained a pattern of spending that far exceeds the couple's documented income funded by credit cards in her own name. Her current personal debt load is approximately $124,000. She has, in effect, been living on a future she imagined, not one she earned." Finally, Dr. Helen Foster, the vocational expert, delivered the killing blow. "Your Honor, the petitioner claims she sacrificed a lucrative career. Our research indicates she holds an MBA from the Yale School of Management, and prior to the marriage, the Marancio held a senior marketing position with an annual salary of $180,000. She voluntarily left that position. Given her qualifications and the current job market, her earning potential remains in the top 5% of the nation. With each presentation, a new layer of Jayla's fantasy was stripped away. Her $4 million mountain of entitlement was being leveled into a barren plain of reality. Avery never moved. He sat at his table, hands folded, looking straight ahead. He did not look at Jayla. He did not need to. He could feel her world imploding. When they were finished, Mr. Sterling rose one last time. "Your Honor, based on the actual documented facts, the petitioner's request for $4 million is absurd. Her request for any alimony at all is questionable. given her own significant earning capacity and the short duration of the marriage where this financial disparity was a factor. However, in the spirit of expedience, Mr. Wesleyan is prepared to offer temporary, rehabilitative support, as dictated by state guidelines for his income bracket. Judge Morrison looked at Robert Vance, who seemed to have shrunk inside his expensive suit. Mr. Vance, do you have any response to this mountain of evidence? Vance cleared his throat. Your Honor, we were not privy to these documents. We based our petition on the information provided by my client. The judge cut him off, her voice like ice. Did you or did you not perform any due diligence before filing a $4 million claim against a man who, on paper, makes less than $60,000 a year? Because what this looks like to me, counsel, is either gross incompetence or a deliberate attempt to intimidate and extort. I'm not sure which is worse. She turned her gaze to Jayla, who was now visibly trembling. Ms. Wesleyan, let me be very clear. This court is not a lottery. Your marriage is not a winning ticket. Your ex-husband's family wealth, held in a trust he does not control, is not your personal ATM. Based on the evidence presented, I am dismissing your petition for a $4 million settlement in its entirety. It is denied with prejudice, meaning you cannot file it again. As for temporary support, based on Mr. Wesleyan's documented income of $58,000 and your own proven earning capacity of over $180,000, I am making a ruling that I believe is more than generous under the circumstances. I am ordering temporary spousal support in the amount of $1,200 per month for a period of 6 months only, at which point it terminates permanently. That is my ruling. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed the sound of Jayla's world shattering. She stared at the judge, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. $1,200. It wouldn't even cover a third of the rent on her condo. As the judge swept out of the room, Robert Vance was already packing his briefcase, his face pale. He leaned over and whispered to Jayla, his voice a venomous hiss, loud enough for Avery to hear. You lied to me. You made a fool of me. My firm will be billing you for the full $20,000 retainer, and we are officially withdrawing as counsel effective immediately. You're on your own. He turned and walked away without a backward glance. Jayla was left alone at the table, a solitary, defeated figure in her $8,000 suit that now looked like a costume. The 12 lawyers behind Avery stood up in unison, gathered their papers, and filed out as silently as they had entered. Avery stood up last. He looked at Jayla for the first time. Her face was a ruin. The mask was gone, and all that was left was raw, unfiltered panic. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. He felt nothing. No triumph, no pity, no anger. Just empty space. He turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving her in the wreckage of the life she had tried to steal. The consequence cascade began almost immediately. The first voicemail from Jayla arrived on Avery's phone before he had even left the courthouse parking garage. His phone was set to automatically transcribe them. Voicemail 1, 11:31 a.m. Avery, what the hell was that? 12 lawyers? Where did you get the money for 12 lawyers? A trust? What trust? You lied to me. For our entire marriage, you lied to me. Call me back. This is insane. Her voice was a mixture of fury and confusion. He deleted it and got in his 10-year-old Camry, voicemail 2:17 p.m. Okay, I get it. It was a power play. Very clever. You made your point. You humiliated me. Now call me so we can talk about a real settlement. A quiet one. We can still work this out, Avery. Just you and me. Her tone had shifted to bargaining, a desperate attempt to regain control. He was at the hardware store by then, walking the aisles, the familiar smells of paint and fertilizer grounding him. He deleted the message. Voicemail 3, 8:45 p.m. Vance just sent me a bill for $20,000 and dropped me. He said I have no case. Avery, please. What is that trust? You never told me. We're married. What's mine is yours. Right? That's what you said in our vows. All that I have, I share with you. Remember? Her voice was smaller now, laced with fear. The callback to their vows was a bitter twist of irony. He deleted the message without a change in expression. The final voicemail came 2 days later, a broken, sobbing message that was barely coherent. Voicemail 4, next day, 10:03 a.m. Sound of crying. I'm going to lose the condo, the lease agent called. My credit cards are all declined. I had to return the BMW. They said the financing was contingent and it didn't clear the final review. Avery, you can't do this to me. You can't. After everything, I loved you. I really did. Please, just help me. He listened to this last one, a flicker of something, pity perhaps, or just the ghost of a memory of the woman he once thought he knew, stirring within him. But it was like feeling a phantom limb. The connection had been severed too cleanly, too deeply. He deleted the message and then blocked her number. The consequences for Jayla were swift and brutal, a perfect mirror of the lifestyle she had tried to project. The $4,000 a month East Rock condo was the first to go. She was evicted for non-payment. The $43,000 BMW was repossessed. She began selling her designer possessions on Poshmark for pennies on the dollar. The $8,700 Armani suit she wore to court sold for $500. The $2,400 Burberry dress for $300. She was forced to move into a small one-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of Hamden, a place with thin walls and the constant smell of cooking from the neighbors. The most damning consequence was the one Dr. Foster had predicted. She had to get a job. With a 5-year gap on her resume and no professional references willing to speak for her after her story became quiet gossip in New Haven's elite circles, her Yale MBA was not the golden ticket she imagined. She eventually landed a mid-level marketing position at an insurance company in Hartford. Her salary was $65,000 a year, barely more than Avery's, and most of it went to servicing the massive credit card debt she had accumulated. She had flown too close to a sun she never knew existed, and its gravity had crushed her. 1 year later, a bright Saturday morning in late autumn. The air at Wesleyan Hardware's flagship store in Stamford was crisp and smelled of fresh-cut pine and possibility. Avery stood in the paint section, his sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. His deep brown skin was luminous in the fluorescent light. He was no longer just the manager. He had taken a more active role in the family business, overseeing training and community outreach for all 3 locations. Beside him stood Imani, a 19-year-old with bright, intelligent eyes and her hair in a crown of beautiful, intricate braids. She was the first recipient of the Wesleyan Trades Scholarship, a program Avery had established using a portion of the funds from his trust, a request the board, led by his Auntie Carol, had enthusiastically approved. The scholarship provided full tuition for young people in the New Haven area to attend trade school, plus a paid apprenticeship at one of the Wesleyan stores. "Okay, so watch this," Avery said, his voice warm and patient. "The trick to getting a perfect custom tint is not to dump it all in at once. You add the colorant slowly, let the machine mix it, and then check it against the swatch. Patience is the most important tool you have." Imani watched, her focus absolute. "Like my grandma says about her sweet potato pie," she said with a grin. "You can't rush the goodness." Avery laughed, a full, easy sound that reached his eyes. "Your grandma is a wise woman." He felt a vibration in his pocket. He pulled out his phone and saw a text from his Auntie Carol. "Sunday dinner at my place? I'm making your favorite braised short ribs." He smiled. "On my way," he texted back, even though it was a day away. It was their running joke. Later that day, the work done, Avery drove not to his temporary apartment, but to the old Colonial in Westville. He had moved back in 6 months ago. The house was no longer empty. It was filled with his things, his peace, the smell of lemon polish he now applied himself every other Sunday. In his pocket was a folded piece of paper. It was a thank you letter from Imani. On the back, she had drawn a picture. It was a charmingly rendered drawing of a black man with neat locks, a smiling black woman with braids, and a young black girl with beaded cornrows that clicked when she moved, all standing in front of a house they were building with Habitat for Humanity, a program his scholarship was partnered with. Underneath, she had written, "The Wesleyan Team." Avery had framed a copy and put it on his desk. It was, he had decided, the most valuable piece of art he owned. He changed out of his work clothes and into a simple $20 sweatshirt and jeans. He drove to the Quinnipiac River State Park, a place he had loved since he was a boy. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees, and the air was cool and clean. He walked the familiar trails, his $89 Timex watch on his wrist, his old Toyota Camry in the parking lot. Nothing in his material life had changed, yet everything was different. He thought briefly of Jayla. He had heard through the grapevine that she was still in Hartford, still working, still paying off her debts. He felt no anger, no satisfaction, not even pity. She was simply a character in a chapter of his life that was now closed. Forgiveness, he had learned, wasn't for her. It was for him. It was the act of putting down a heavy, useless weight. He reached a scenic overlook, the river a ribbon of silver below. He took a deep breath. True wealth wasn't the $22 million in a vault. It was the legacy his grandfather had built, the trust of his community, the weight of a well-made hammer in his hand. It was the quiet pride in Imani's eyes as she learned a new skill. It was the unconditional love of his Auntie Carol and the promise of Sunday dinner. True wealth was the ability to build things, a business, a community, a scholarship, a life of quiet purpose. It was the peace that settled in your soul when you realized you already had everything you truly needed. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was a resolution. And Avery Wesleyan, standing alone on a hill in New Haven, finally felt free. What do you think is the most important thing to protect in your life? Let us know in the comments below. And for more stories about finding true strength, be sure to like and subscribe to Love Beyond Pride.